We were young men in the military. Your father and I were recruited for a project. They told us it was biological warfare or a virus.
What killed those men?
What killed them, I won't even write about. We have no context for what killed those men, or any appreciation of the scale at which it'll be unleashed in the future.
A plague?
The plague to end all plagues, Agent Mulder. A silent weapon for a quiet war. The systematic release of an indiscriminate organism for which the men who will bring it on still have no cure. They've been working on this for 50 years. While the rest of the world have been fighting gooks and commies, these men have been secretly negotiating a planned Armageddon.
Negotiating with whom?
I think you know.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. It's the Popcorn Digest. Hello and welcome to Popcorn Digest, the podcast about the films you love and some you don't. I'm your host Gareth Green, and joining me as always is my full-time co-host and part-time conspiracy theorist, Andrew Raphael.
Oh, they're always out to get me.
And in the latest episode of the show, we're joined by sci-fi writer and director M.K Rhodes. Thank you for joining us for today's episode.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And you're all joining us for an altogether spooky episode of the show as we ask some big questions such as, are we alone in the universe? Have we secretly made contact with intelligent alien life? And why did nobody stop Chris Carter after 6 seasons? That's right, we're watching The X-Files Fight the Future. But do we find the truth out there? Find out after the trailer.
Hey, Steve, you okay?
I got the wind knocked out of me.
What's down there, Stevie? Anything?
It's a human skull.
There are forces on Earth
Toss it up here, dude. No way, but wife, it's mine.
too hidden to be detected. There are conspiracies too vast
Hey, Stevie.
to be uncovered.
You okay?
Hey, man, let's get out of here.
But on June 19th, the truth is coming.
Marginalised FBI agent and tinfoil hat enthusiast Agent Fox Spooky Mulder is joined by skeptic, despite the fact that she was abducted, probed and impregnated by aliens, partner Agent Dana Scully in their search for little green men. When they find themselves at the centre of a plot involving black goo, alien viruses and human hosts for alien creatures, our heroes must overcome the odds to find the truth of the matter, that they're being ripped off by Damon Lindelof. So, X-Files Fight the Future, the first movie in the X-Files canon. I'll jump to you first, MK, because we've introduced you onto the episode because we are obviously going through the X-Files, and I understand that you are a huge fan.
Somewhat slightly diminished these days after the 2 revival series. But yeah, I, like most kids from the 90s, I am a child of the X-Files. It was an enormous influence on me in many ways. And I think Fight the Future is very good. And I think it's weirdly underrated, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm of a similar opinion. I grew up in the 90s. I was very familiar with the X-Files. As with yourself, my appreciation of it has probably diminished now. I very rarely do actually go through full rewatches of the show. It's more about just picking the episodes that you like these days. I haven't really got time to go through everything. But I think I'm a quite firm, solid fan of the X-Files movie. And I think this is, when this film came out, this was the point at which I decided to start watching the X-Files. I'd always known it because it was huge when we were kids, and I can think of a few episodes like Victor Toombs, for example. That was an episode that haunted me, that character, as he did many kids, and also the Fluke monster as well, the one with the weird lips. And
Fluke Man,
yeah, and he lurks in the sewers. I remember that haunting my dreams as well for some time, but I'd never really watched the show with any kind of religious fervor as people did at the time. And it was when the film came out and I watched that, and I've spoken about it with Lord of the Rings on this show before, that kind of introduced me to something that I didn't quite understand, but I wanted to know more. And then I went back and kind of devoured the show. And how about you, Andy? How are you approaching X-Files Fight the Future? Are you a fan, or is this new ground for you?
I'm approaching Fight the Future as a standalone film because I have very little experience with the X-Files. I think I've seen the episode Tombs, and that's about it. Because
Oh, really?
I don't know whether I was actually allowed to watch the X-Files when I was younger. My dad's watched it a lot, and he's actually going through at the moment and rewatching it from the beginning. He's got all the DVD box sets. Having been retired for 25 years now, he's basically an old school binger, so he will devour a series over a couple of days and then move on to something else. And he's currently doing that with the X-Files, and he's getting to the point where it starts to go downhill. And over Christmas, he was talking to me a little bit about it and saying how crap it was. I think it was around about series 7 or something. But yeah, apart from that, I've seen little bits and pieces, but it's just something I've never got around to. And it's kind of sitting there on Netflix for me at the moment. But because, as with all series that kind of go downhill towards the end, the same with Game of Thrones, I start watching them and then my enthusiasm goes because I know it's going to go bad. So it's kind of one of those things that, again, I've just never got around to watching. And it's strange because it's something that I probably should be interested in because I do like things like this. And I do like one of the shows that was heavily inspirational for it, which was Twin Peaks, which I've seen all of that many times over, but just don't know why I just never got around to watching this properly.
It does tick quite a lot of boxes for you, actually,
it's
in terms of some of the sci-fi concepts.
It's a funny one. I think for me, it takes me a long time to really commit to something for, long periods of time. I'm generally somebody who likes to watch sort of individual films or short things. Yeah. It may be something I'll go into at some point, but it's quite good anyway, because I can approach this from a standpoint of just a punter going to watch this at the cinema and seeing how it holds up as its own movie, really. So that's quite good.
I think that's a good... it's good to have you and that way of looking at the film on the episode as well, because as MK's mentioned and I have mentioned, we're both fans of the show. It's good to have that other viewpoint at this film, because many of the notes that I've taken is, how does this play for somebody that isn't familiar with the X-Files? And that's something that I do want to get into as the show goes on. And so I may be leaning quite heavily on you during this episode as well. Just to ask MK, what would you say is the perfect X-Files episode before we do move on into the film? What is your favourite episode or favourite series of episodes?
Well, my favourite, excluding the myth arc episodes. Yeah. My favourite standalone episode is probably one that a lot of people don't seem to rate very highly, but I think it's brilliant. And it's a big influence on me. I know that I've always sort of liked these kind of storylines, but it's from season 1, which is not the best season at all, but it's a really strong episode. And season 1, Eve.
Eve.
The one with the twins, who it turns out are clones.
Oh, yes. I remember that one.
Yeah, it's so tightly scripted. And the guest spot by, I think her name is Harrison Harris or something. She's also on Frasier, of all things, where she plays the insane, incarcerated progenitor, one of the original clones that these girls are cloned from. She's really, really frightening and unnerving. And it's a really tense, smart, spooky, sad hour of television.
That's the one with aren't they numbered? The Eves.
Yeah.
There's several Eves throughout the episode. Yeah, it's all coming back to me now.
And the little twin girls in it are really unsettling, and they've got their little matching red coats that are very memorable, kind of like Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And their modus operandi that's like genetically programmed into them, where they kill people via foxglove poisoning and things. And I love the way it starts out with... it sets it up as being an alien abduction case. And this is something I've copied a lot in my own writing, where it sets it up as an alien abduction case, and Mulder and Scully go in to investigate. And then it gradually sort of twists into something else, and like, oh, it's not aliens at all. It's something far stranger. And I love when stories sort of detour like that.
Yeah. I mean, I quite like season 1. I think there's a lot of good work in season 1. The show definitely improves as a whole as it goes on for those first few seasons. But I would say also one of my favourite episodes is from season 1, and that is Beyond the Sea with Brad Dourif.
Oh yeah, of course.
And once more, no matter the role, he's just given the performance of a lifetime. Yeah. And yeah, outside of the, as you mentioned, the whole alien mythology, I think that's the episode where it became... wasn't say I was plodding along, I was enjoying it, but that's the episode that first, like, I felt a real emotional impact watching it, and then the series really kind of kicked off for me.
Yeah, well, it's because not only do they have Brad Dourif in there, but they also finally sort of give Gillian Anderson something to really do.
Yes,
and as becomes very apparent over the course of the series, David Duchovny, he's very nice to look at, and he's a good sort of hero, but the series cannot rest on him emotionally. He doesn't have the weight as an actor to carry the series emotionally, and that all gets put on Gillian Anderson's shoulders, and she just carries it off like a champ.
Yeah, I mean, I like David Duchovny, but he's definitely the more wooden and emotionally stunted of the two in terms of acting. He's not really known for his grand emotional roles.
He's a good actor. Gillian Anderson is a great actor.
Definitely. And speaking about the reboot, actually, I was speaking to Andy about it earlier today, and I do remember that she said that was asked about her greatest regrets and said that it was coming back for the rebooted X-Files seasons.
Yeah, poor Gillian.
Okay, so moving on to X-Files Fight the Future, we normally do lay out a little context into when these films were made and what really influenced their making. And, well, we've already spoken at length about the X-Files TV show, and really, this is the culmination of, 5 solid years of unbounded hype across the whole of TV, really, because the X-Files was inescapable in the 90s. It was everywhere. I remember even at one point, the X-Files theme, some techno trance version of it, was charting number 1 in the UK for the longest time while I was in primary school. So it was huge. And it was decided that Chris Carter wanted to make a movie. And I think looking at this, he wanted to transition into making movies rather than continue the TV series. But I haven't looked into this enough, really, to lay that in solid ground.
Yeah, that was the plan. He didn't want to make anything after season 6. It was supposed to transition into making movies, but then Fox refused to let the series go off the air. And that's why season 7 kind of sucks.
Yes, yeah. I would say as well, in terms of, this is where my X-Files credentials may be revoked, but I've never seen past mid-8 season.
Well, you're not really missing out on much there. Season 9 is pretty weak. There's like no standout episodes in season 9, but I think there's a lot of strong stuff in season 8. I think the myth arc episodes in season 8 are really strong.
Yeah.
I think all the standalone stuff is not, so it's best to sort of skip those, except for Roadrunners. Roadrunners is brilliant. That's a really frightening, disturbing episode.
Oh, I may have to seek that one out, actually, then. I don't think I've seen that one.
That's the one where, again, it's like Eve. It starts off in one place and goes somewhere even more bizarre and crazy, where Scully goes off on her own and her car breaks down in a small town. It seems like there's a religious cult there.
Oh, this rings a bell, actually.
And then it turns out that they worship the second coming of Jesus, but what they believe to be the second coming of Jesus is a horrific slug parasite that lives in your spine. And I don't know how this got on the air, because it's really gory. Like, it's an R-rated level of gore. And it was on primetime television.
I have 100% seen that episode. Yeah, I completely remember it now. Yeah, what an episode. Also, one that I rewatched in the run-up to this show was Home, as well, as because everybody always talks about Home. It's one that I plan to revisit after I saw it chart on a couple of Halloween TV episodes that you should watch, and Home was always quite high up there for how disturbing that was. So I watched that as well prior to the episode, just to get a feel of what the Monster of the Week episodes were. But that's also quite dark and disturbing.
Yeah, that's
I forgot how brutally that one opened with the burying of of an infant child.
Yeah, a deformed, still alive infant child, and
yes,
it gets worse from there. Like, I know it's the golden age of television now, allegedly, but I mean, stuff like that doesn't really make it onto screens anymore. Now they'll just have boring, basic cable sex on Game of Thrones or something. But I know there's a lot of incest on that, but They don't do incest like the X-Files did incest. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I nearly found myself saying, "Well, we need more of that on TV."
Yeah.
But you know what we do? I'm putting my flag firmly in the ground. We need more. If you're gonna have incest in your show, it needs to be really gross incest.
Yeah, well, this is the grossest imaginable.
But yes, moving on to the X-Files again, Fight the Future. I will say one of the things that I can see that they made a decision with as well at one point with this film was that they didn't want it to be populated with, and this isn't really a slight on people that are involved in the episodes, but they didn't want it to be just populated by people who are no names that are just there to blend into the series because they don't have the time to really establish them as characters beyond the actor. So a lot of the time you find with the X-Files that there are a lot of people that have gone on to have careers, but at that time they were just like character actors that you didn't really recognize from anywhere else. Whereas this one, I mean, it has like a Glenn Headley as a bartender for one scene. I feel like they've decided, let's have a bit of fun with the casting here. So they've started to cast names, and Martin Landau as well in a role that I think is actually rather great.
Fresh off his Oscar win for Ed Wood.
Exactly. And yeah, so it seems like they're having more fun with that. But I would say as well, they've definitely gone down the right road as to the director that they brought on board, because they did have a whole host of directors that they could have lent on from the series. I mean, like, we do have the likes of David Nutter as well, who was, I imagine, at one point a contender. But Rob Bowman, I think he's gone on to have, and I mean, I say this in air quotes, the most successful cinematic career. I know that he made Reign of Fire as well. It's
A lot of people rate that highly. I don't remember it since it came out, but it has a cult following.
I wouldn't say I'm part of the cult following, but I think they tripped themselves up with that film by having a poster that was far more enjoyable than the film itself.
Yeah, that's
And it's not often that you can say that about a film. But on the poster, it has like a picture of the London cityscape. It's on fire. The Thames is on fire. And above it, you have dragons and helicopters caught in battle. And in the actual film, none of that actually happens. It's all like based 20 years after that point. And everybody's just all a bit doom and gloom, living out in the grey moors in some forgotten part of England.
Yeah, I remember the way it looks. That's all I remember about it. It has a very striking look, although I don't know if I would consider it very striking today. I saw it when I was like, I don't know, 12?
Yeah.
I have not seen his other cinematic opus, Elektra.
Oh, did he do Elektra? Oh, dear.
That's the one I was going to go on
no.
to, actually. Like, when I say most successful cinematic career, it does kind of culminate with one of the worst films of all time, which is, as mentioned, Elektra.
Oh, that's a terrible film.
Yeah, Jason Isaacs, I remember, is in that film as well for a very short time.
And Terrence Stamp looking very embarrassed.
I've never seen it. I've seen the trailer for it, because I remember when it came out, the trailer was everywhere. You couldn't get away from it. But the reception to that film, I mean, they made essentially a spin-off character from a failed superhero film anyway. Daredevil wasn't up to much, and they decided, let's do a spin-off. And then Elektra came along, and nobody saw that either. I don't know why that's surprising.
The initial Daredevil film, I think she tracked as being the most popular character or something like that. And they obviously thought, oh, we need to do something female-led at this point. Because around that time, they were doing, like, was it Catwoman wasn't far behind, I don't think, either. So maybe it was part of that whole...
And did we have films like Charlie's Angels out at the time as well, like trying to cash in on Mick G's
Mick G.
magnum opus?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. It was a very strange time in cinema, I think, that early to mid-2000s period for superhero films. I think we were kind of still a little bit lost here and there.
I'm not saying that the times were better back then.
No.
And I hate to get into the topic of superheroes again, but I'm not saying times were better back then for the superhero genre. But you had more swings, like real, like people taking more out there swings and misses. Like if a film was bad, you'd end up with like Catwoman, which you could just sit there and laugh. I feel like films of that particular genre are now just very homogenous. It's all just a soup. Nothing changes. It's all just the same film over and over again.
Yeah, there's definitely more variety back then, even though there was probably a bigger gulf in quality. But you just tend to get ones now that are just fine or they're good.
Yeah.
But they're not usually very good or excellent. They're usually just fine rather than being a train wreck or anything like that. So, I mean, we've talked many a time on this show about being very bored with all that. I was going to say before, like with the X-Files movie, I mean, if the X-Files was around now, I don't think this kind of thing would happen because, as MK mentioned, we are supposedly in the golden age of television. And in a way, the kind of visuals and the scope of the X-Files movie is really what you get now with big budget television shows, because the kind of distinction between movies and television's blurred a lot.
Yeah, the
in
lines
the
are
last
blurred
10,
now.
15 years. This is kind of almost like a relic of the past doing a big budget movie version of a TV show, because this kind of thing, you get every week on some of the bigger shows. So yeah, it is weird. It is weird watching this film because I was really, it kind of works for the most part as a standalone experience, but there are a couple of things where I'm just like, I have no idea who that is or what they're talking about. So yeah, but on the whole, it kind of stands up. But yeah, it is strange to watch this film now because I always view these kind of films like, oh, they're not that long ago. But then when you actually watch them, it's like, yeah, they are from another era.
It definitely works better as a standalone than when you actually try and fit it into the series. It comes between seasons 5 and 6, and they made it before season 5. It was written and made before they filmed season 5. But then who knows how Chris Carter's mind works. The way he decides to lead into it at the end of season 5 is an interesting path. And then the way he decides to lead out of it in season 6 is also an interesting choice.
It's certainly a choice. Yeah. I mean, I decided to familiarize myself with the episodes on either side of the film. So I watched them both yesterday. And to be honest, in no way, shape or form does the season finale for season 5 really lead into anything with regards to the movie. There's a whole plot involving a clairvoyant child that may have some alien DNA that can, he can read minds and knows where aliens are and that type of thing, as we find out in season 6. But the only thing that really carries over into the film is the fact that the X-Files close.
Yeah.
That is it. And then when season 6 begins with episode 1, they walk back the movie so quickly. In I would say within the first 10 minutes, because we'll get into this with the film anyway, but it ends with Scully and Mulder escaping an alien spacecraft as it's taking off. And they have to walk that back so hard just to reestablish the status quo in the first 10 minutes of episode 1 of season 6. And Scully is suddenly completely on the other side of the fence. She's like, I'm based in science. I'm trying to keep you straight. I didn't see anything. And I have always felt that that's a bit of a cop-out.
Watching it and then reading a little bit about it, I'm wondering whether something happened during the making of season 5, because obviously they'd made the film and they were doing post-production and reshoots during the making of season 5. And I wonder at that point whether the plan to finish after 5 or 6 seasons and then go into movies got truncated at that point. And then the order for season 6 came and they were like, we're not sure how to deal with this film now. Because it seems to me when you're watching the film, it feels like the start of a season finale or something like that. And you think it's going to lead to something. And then when you read about it later, it's like, oh, it doesn't really. So I'm thinking whether something happened in season 5 and they were kind of stuck with this movie that, given what Fox wanted to happen in the actual TV series, it didn't quite fit in anymore with their intentions. So they were having to sort of weave around it. And I'm wondering as well, that shot of when the spaceship goes over, it's very clearly a green screen shot of Mulder and Scully. And I'm wondering whether they purposely had Gillian Anderson face down so she doesn't see the spaceship. I wonder whether they reshot that to sort of make it work a little bit more with the season 6 opener, because I actually wrote in my notes, it's like, of course she's face down through the entire takeoff of this huge ship that you can probably hear. Even the fact that she didn't see it, she could probably hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed very, convenient to me that they would do that. And having read about, this initial plan to go into movies to finish off the series, and then the fact that just gets completely abandoned, it seems like that and the whole downward spiral of the series, it just seems obviously that Chris Carter kind of lost interest because his narrative intention had been thrown out the window for sort of financial reasons more than anything else.
Yeah, they wrap it up. They wrap up the entire original myth arc in the middle of the 6th season.
Yeah.
And then you can tell that's as far as they planned. And then the rest of the series until season 8, when they figure something else out, is completely rudderless. Like season 7 has some myth arc episodes scattered in, but they're just and they decide to let the actors start directing episodes, and with mixed results.
Oh, it sounds like Twin Peaks.
It's exactly like the second half of season 2 of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they brought it back in a completely different way for the most recent series, but yeah, when you watch Twin Peaks and you get halfway through that season and they end the main story arc, and then it kind of comes back a little bit towards the end, but there's about 7 or 8 episodes in the middle that are just guff.
Yeah.
And they're weirdly have a weird tone to them, which reading about season 6 seems like a similar thing that happens, because I was reading about before where it says that a lot of the standalone episodes become more romantic or humorous, which doesn't seem very X-Filesy.
The comedy quota goes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and X-Files and comedy don't seem like something that would really go together.
It actually does.
It does. It does. Yeah, I agree.
Well, it doesn't show through on the film anyway, or the episode that I watched.
The film itself is very, well, to a certain degree, self-serious, and I think that's the right thing to do. But there are a few comedy-based episodes. Oh, what's that very famous one? The one where it's like a meta take on the X-Files, and it's the X-Files as told from other people's point of view.
Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
I was about to say, yeah, it's got a very eccentric name. That's the one. That's one of the best comedy episodes as well for me.
That's one of the best episodes, full stop. It really is like a 10 out of 10 piece of writing. It's so good.
I'm sure. Does it have... Is that an Twin Peaks reference in the episode as well of... Because I've always thought this, I've never really mentioned it, but is that a Twin Peaks reference of the whole vignette of Mulder coming into the store to just eat a piece of pie and then to leave?
No, actually what that is, and what also makes that episode brilliant, is that it's actually the one sort of thing about UFO stuff that actually captures what, quote unquote, actual UFO stories are, which is just bizarre shit. Just bizarre shit. They completely nail the Lord Kinboat thing, where all these people have conflicting accounts of what happened, but the one thing they all share is the most ridiculous element, which is like Lord Kinboat, and that's exactly what UFO narratives are like. Mulder coming in eating a piece of pie is straight up. Men in Black isn't the movie with Will Smith. Men in Black lore dates back to the 50s and 60s and beyond. And that's the kind of thing that the Men in Black would do, where they seemed to be like human, but not quite human. And they acted really weird. Yeah. They'd like go into diners and they'd like try to drink Jell-O. They'd like order Jell-O and try to drink Jell-O, or they didn't know how to use forks, or they'd be like really fascinated by a pen. And as reported, allegedly reported, they seem to be something presenting as a human that did not know how to really, pass as a human. It's that Mulder ordering the pieces of pie over and over and over again is just a riff on that.
Yeah, there's always something of a kind of like Bigfoot element to me, when it comes to, in terms of like the characters that always come forward and say that they've seen Bigfoot. And often they're quite eccentric characters that will have no problem acting out or moving about with a cardboard cutout of Bigfoot, or will make noises of the beast that they've seen. And I always, when I see like videos like that, and this isn't all for for everything in that realm, but there's always an element of that with those characters that are always quite eccentric, and I think matching the eccentricities of the stories that they have as well. Yeah,
ufology is a subculture. Bigfoot is definitely a subculture.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Squatchers and things. But the interesting thing about Bigfoot, I don't believe in Bigfoot, But the interesting thing about Bigfoot is it's the only sort of, quote unquote cryptid that predates Western colonialism, since it actually dates back to the Native Americans.
Oh, wow.
Make of that what you will.
It adds an interesting element to it, though, really.
Yeah, the term Sasquatch is a grossly mispronounced white person transliteration of what one of the First Nations peoples in the Pacific Northwest referred to that creature in their mythology as.
It's what we do best.
I think the original pronunciation is something like Seskuts or something, but
I do like a good Bigfoot story, to be honest. I feel like, though, now, and this is getting off topic, but I do feel like the History Channel shows that we have, or Nat Geo, whichever show that they're on, all of these like Finding Bigfoot or those type of shows, I think that they diminish the idea of, not to say that I believe in anything like that either, but I think it diminishes it somewhat by, I guess, commercializing the whole thing when it used to be this odd thing and this odd little subculture. And the stories had a real personality to them, whereas now it's almost like we're getting to the point in which we are commercializing myths.
Yeah, and they're never going to find Bigfoot, so...
No, of course not.
That's one of the reasons when I made my my UFO movie, I didn't want to make an actual documentary, because I think there's a huge difference between Bigfoot and UFOs. First of all, UFOs are actually real, which is not to say that they're necessarily aliens. We don't know what they are.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you can't make a documentary about something that you have no access to, and probably, if it's intelligently controlled, doesn't want to have a documentary made about it.
Yeah.
I actually had people get really mad at me online that, you made a mockumentary. No, it's not a mockumentary. One of them is a certain YouTube channel, and they were upset that I wasn't using my resources, such as they are, to interview witnesses and things. And it's like, well, that's not making a documentary about UFOs. That's making a documentary about people who have claimed they have seen UFOs. There's a difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is a good point. I did want to speak about the film The Gulf of Silence as well during the episode. And so I think now's a great point to actually bring it up as well. Yeah, so I watched it last month, the beginning of December, and to be honest, it floored me. I don't want to give too much away in regards to what actually happens and how the story unfolds, but I felt that there was a great deal of authenticity in regards to the way in which the story is presented. And afterwards, I had to take a time out. I was sitting down speaking to my wife about it, and I was like, it just left me feeling with this real sense of not quite lost, but like dread, existential dread, and this emptiness as well inside. And I was like, I think you really hit on something with that in terms of our place in the universe as well, and also on an emotional level. So I don't really want to, as I say, I don't want to get into why it landed with me and what particular points were, because I think this is something for everybody to discover and watch on their own. But I genuinely think that you've made and I don't mean to really contextualize it like this, but to say that it was made during lockdown as well, it just kind of adds to the mind-bogglingness of it, how you managed to get this together. I mean, I wanted to ask you about that. What were the challenges of making a feature film during lockdown, in the middle of a pandemic, essentially?
Well, everything. And it wasn't just the pandemic here. We also had the George Floyd riots, which happened during filming. Mm. And my actress lived downtown at the time, and it was really bad down there. I'm up in the hills where everything was pretty quiet. But she's like a lot of artists. She's very sensitive, and it terrified her to the point that she left Los Angeles the day after we finished shooting. So,
oh really?
Yeah. Although now she's back. It was an arduous, difficult time. But I have a pretty strong command of special effects and filmmaking craft, so I was able to do everything sort of mostly from my apartment, aside from filming her, which was done, some of it on a soundstage and some of it in her apartment.
Yeah.
Anything with the black void background is a soundstage. Anything with the sort of metal-looking teal shots that come later on were done in her apartment. And also on the roof of her apartment, because I did not manage to get it in the film. I wanted to, but she lived right across the street from the building, the Eastman building that you see in Predator 2.
Really?
Yeah. where he holds the little thing aloft and gets struck by lightning.
Yeah.
I did try and put that in there, but in the end I couldn't make it fit.
Oh, that would have been a nice little Easter egg.
Yeah, it was a shame. But it was surreal being up there, like literally right across the street from that building. So I shot the stuff with her in about 2 weeks, and then everything else, all the visual effects and everything were done in my apartment or out in Griffith Park at night.
Well, I mean, I will say I think she's a phenomenal actress as well. I actually did some look as soon as I finished watching it. I thought, why haven't I seen more of her as well? And I did some Googling and found out that she was a rapper as well.
Well, she's a comedian.
Yes, and I know that she had a short show as well in which it was about she was a housewife that also was a rapper on the side.
And she also did something with Rachel Dratch, I believe, or maybe some other SNL. I get them confused, all those SNL women. But I was not familiar with her career, her background before then. She just submitted an audition and was like, okay, there we go.
Well, as I say, her background seems to be based in comedy, but I think given the seriousness of the movie and the emotional journey that she's on throughout the film as well, I think she nailed it. But I also think that the key for that film is in the writing as well. The writing is great, and I love the authenticity in terms of the way in which the story is presented. I know that at one point we have a whole chapter that's narrated with an audiobook.
Yeah, and that's me.
I had never made the connection. Has there been any pushback from the fan base just in terms of the authenticity about that?
Well, I'm glad you used that word, fan base, since that's really what ufology is. It's a, as I sort of say in the audiobook portion of the film, it's ufology is a subculture. It's not a science. And yeah, there's definitely been pushback. A lot of people are angry about the movie. A lot of people are angry that I make fun of Bob Lazar. A lot of get over it, deal with it.
It's quite shocking to me, to be honest, that there's because I genuinely felt that it was a valid interpretation and a valid take on that world.
There was originally more to Bob Lazar in the film. I was going to just really lay into him, but at the same time, I had a certain runtime that I thought I should meet. And interestingly enough, the one I devote more time to, Richard Doty, who is pure evil. He was actually involved with X-Files.
Oh, was he? See, I'm not particularly knowledgeable of that character. I know that you do take him on in the film, but not to get further off topic. But how in what way is he evil, would you say?
Well, aside from the fact that he's obviously a sociopath, since his entire career is lying and making shit up and spreading it around as truth, is he started doing that. There was a UFO researcher named Paul Benowitz who lived sort of across the street from a military base. And he started receiving, on his radio transmitter, he started receiving transmissions from the base that he should not have been receiving. And he believed that these were aliens. And so Richard Doty, who was basically an Air Force agent, was assigned to Paul Benowitz to figure out what he knew and figure out what information he had been intercepting. And when he found out that Paul Benowitz believed that this was aliens, he said, oh, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just start feeding him a lot of, quote unquote, inside information about aliens to, lead him off.
Right.
And what he actually ended up doing was driving this man insane, and to the point where he ended up in a mental institution.
Yeah.
And there's a documentary about Richard Doty that came out a few years ago called Mirage Men. And when he's talking about all this, he's, aside from the fact that just his face is really disturbing, there's something, he just has soulless eyes like a great white shark. He feels no remorse.
Like a doll's eyes.
Exactly. He feels no remorse. It's funny to him.
Oh, right. So he's just taken this person for a ride, essentially, and driven them insane. That's awful.
Yeah, and he's done that to lots of other people, not necessarily directly, but by proxy. Because after he got a taste of that, he's like, "Oh, this is fun," and he basically became the Air Force's key point person for distributing fake crap. Like you may have heard of Majestic 12, the MJ-12 documents, very infamous.
Yeah,
those are his. He wrote those. Probably in collaboration with other people, but he wrote those. And then he tried doing it again, even though he's retired now, allegedly. He tried doing it again with something called Project Serpo, which didn't catch on because it's just not. It was a disappointing sequel.
Yeah.
I have a begrudging respect for him because he's a science fiction writer, basically. And his science fiction has inspired The X-Files is based on it. To a point.
Yeah.
He was directly involved with some of the early seasons of The X-Files. He came on as a consultant and actually wrote the episode The Blessing Way, which may be why The Blessing Way sucks. But whole subcultures have sprung up around the crap he's written. I mean, that's power.
Yeah, so he's almost like got this protective layer around him for anybody that dared to even criticize him.
It's just a strange thing to think about that in terms of impact, he's probably the most influential science fiction writer of the 20th century, and nobody really knows who he is.
A bit like what's his name? I nearly mentioned Scientology. We could have had somebody
L. Ron Hubbard
really on our case. L. Ron Hubbard, yes. Which
he is compared to L. Ron Hubbard in the film, isn't he?
Yeah, I make that comparison because they both wrote. Although I think Richard Doty is a more imaginative and a better writer than L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
MJ-12, if you look at it for 5 seconds, you think, oh my God, this looks legit. Whereas, you read anything about Lord Xenu or whatever, this is obvious.
God, yeah.
That's actually something that I didn't know that he was brought on board. See, I will say that my knowledge beyond the X-Files of the UFO conspiracy theory and the following that it has, I don't really know where the origins are of these type of stories. So I will say as well, watching The Gulf of Silence from my standpoint as well, being a newcomer to this universe, I think that it's a great introduction as well for someone like me, and it made me want to know more. It was excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. There is a lot of genuine stuff in the film. It's not all fiction.
I think that's part of the authenticity. That in terms of what sold it to me is that, from my point of view, there was things that I recognized as you say, not all of it's science fiction, not all of it's made up. It made me start to question which parts of the story are based in facts and which ones are your own embellishments as well, which, again, it just made me want to know more of that world.
The real reason I did it in that way was because, because of the X-Files. There's only 2 real ways that, alien or alien conspiracy or UFO narratives have been dealt with in popular media. There's the X-Files, where it's, conspiracy terror. The aliens are evil. Perhaps not necessarily evil, but they're hostile to us. Or there is the Close Encounters Steven Spielberg thing, which is, they're benevolent, they inspire awe.
Wondrous.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the facts and then you go to, you take the leap and say, okay, well, if there is something to this, if this is real, what do the facts tell you? And the facts, unfortunately, tell you that if they are real, they don't care. Either way.
Yeah.
They don't care either way.
In a way, it's like that kind of like belief in God and belief in a higher power. Well, if there is one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't give a shit.
Exactly. That's, again, something the X-Files touches on too. Mulder's quest for aliens is, his version of Scully's belief in God.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's an easy thing for this show to make, but it's true. All the people who are really invested in ufology and UFOs, that's their alternative to, that's their, finding God. But the thing is, if aliens are real, if, UFOs are their technology or whatever, you're still back to square one, because if anything, they're even more distant than God. They don't care. They've been if the historical records are true and everything, they've certainly been here since the late 1800s. There's been multiple opportunities for them to intervene on our behalf for our well-being. They could have stopped the Holocaust. They could have stopped the bombing of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. They could have stopped the flu epidemic. They could have stopped COVID. But they haven't done anything on our behalf.
I mean, I've always said, in a way, it's almost scarier that the idea of there being intelligent life out there and it just doesn't give a shit about us, because I personally find the idea of aliens far more believable than the idea of there being a God. I understand why people buy into ufology, even though it's not personally something that I don't say 100%. I do believe that there is intelligent life out there. I don't know if we've made contact or anything like that. And so, in my opinion, I find that idea as well of there being aliens and they don't give a shit about us far more terrifying than the idea that there's a God and he doesn't give a shit about us.
I've had a lot of people say that to me, that they find that idea really frightening, and I don't know. I find it reassuring. If they don't care about us, but they're like visiting Earth and they're not like hurting us. I don't know. I think that's reassuring. I think that speaks better for them than it does for us necessarily.
So what do we think? They're like observing us, just seeing where we go.
Yeah. If the accounts of their incursions and nuclear weapons bases in both the U.S. and the Soviet Union are to be taken as true, then obviously the implication of that is don't fuck things up, you stupid little monkeys. Everyone seems to jump to the assumption that if they're visiting Earth, it's because of us. And I wrote that into the film. There's over 9 million species on this planet. What makes you think that only one of them, which is fairly recently on the scene, is the only thing of interest? If aliens have the technology to cross space or time or dimensions, maybe even with their technology, I'm pretty sure they'd be able to communicate with dolphins or whales. There's other animals on this planet that have language that we don't comprehend.
I think that's in a way, because we've been briefly talking about it, religion is kind of, for a lot of people, made humans seem more important than they actually are within the makeup of the world. Because you have, God made man in his own image and all that kind of gumph. I think it kind of unbalances where we are in the world and our place. And it does make people feel like they're more important than they actually are. So I think that's where that's kind of come from in a way, I think. Because, in a way, like the stuff in the film when it was talking about going into the ocean, even though it leans a bit more into the sort of Close Encounters area, it did get me thinking about the abyss in a way. Yeah,
well, that's the thing. That's actually not necessarily me making stuff. I'm not James Cameron making stuff up either. It's always been so weird to me, and that's why I put such a heavy emphasis on it. A bulk of the really dramatic UFO sightings are underwater, as recorded. And in fact, there was one just this year, or no, it was last year, but it only got reported this year. One of them went by a Navy submarine, and everyone was really panicked and upset. And apparently the reason that all the UFO disclosure, I hate using that word, but all the UFO disclosure stuff from the last few years has come from the Navy should tell you something. It's not the Air Force.
I guess as well as shown in the film, I know we had that release of the videos as well of the fast-moving objects above water. And that, again, it plays into the idea of them being over another body of water, essentially. Like, we seem to be able to capture them in these environments more often.
Yeah, it's why, based on, the observations of them, they don't seem to fly. They're not flying. They just seem sort of to disregard gravity altogether. They can go in the air, they can go in the water, no problem. So if they are here, the ocean, it's the easiest place to hide. And that's where they've been detected hiding for, since the 40s. None of this is new. It's only just in the last few years that, like the New York Times has started reporting about it.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty to mine as well. And I will say, moving back to the X-Files as well in regards to that, I also think from what you've just mentioned as well about where the easiest place to hide is, I like that this takes it back as well to an idea. We once more get to the point of there being spaceships buried underneath ice and deep glaciers as well, which again is playing into that idea that you've mentioned of aliens living in like underwater and hiding there as well. But playing into this, did either of you get the feeling, just speaking about X-Files for a moment, that with its basis in pre-man and everything that follows and everything with the black goo and the aliens incubate inside human beings, did anybody get a feeling of Prometheus?
Oh
yeah. Not just that, but I mean, when the ship comes out at the end and they're running away from it and everything and climbing up out of the... It's and I'm pretty sure Damon Lindelof has gone on the record saying that, you know, Chris Carter is the reason I do everything I do, and it's like, well, we can tell from your storytelling style.
So that's who we blame.
Makes me laugh on those like 3-hour long documentaries for Prometheus, or Ridley Scott is going, no, original, and it's like, no,
Yeah,
there's nothing original in what you're doing. Looks nice.
Well, I think the thing is that Ridley Scott hasn't seen X-Files, the movie.
Exactly.
Damon Lindelof has.
Damon Lindelof definitely has.
So to him, he's like, this is a great yarn. I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, that is it the purity virus that it's called?
Yeah, that's what it's called in the series.
When it's going into under the skin of that boy, and I was like, yep, I've seen this before, but obviously this came first. But
even the sort of background mythology of it, that you know, life on Earth was created by these aliens. Well, not necessarily. It's actually more complicated than that, I guess. It's and that's one of the things I actually appreciate about the mythology of the X-Files, is that Chris Carter brought aboard some actual scientists to make it plausible, you know, quote unquote plausible. But
of course, yeah.
And that's another thing I liked about, say, Alien Covenant, is it made certain things plausible that previously were not plausible, and that made a lot of people upset, I guess. But one of the things that science fiction films dealing with aliens and, you know, or dealing with aliens in body horror never take into account is the fact that they wouldn't be able to eat us, for starters. Our biochemistry would be incompatible with theirs. We couldn't mate with aliens. You know, none of this.
We'd try. Yeah, I imagine that we would try.
Yeah. None of this would be compatible biologically.
Yeah.
But in the X-Files, the aliens turn out to be the original inhabitants of this planet that, in this very Lovecraftian sense, evolved here hundreds of millions of years ago, before the dinosaurs left Earth to go invade space and conquer the cosmos. And now they're coming back to, you know, reclaim their original world. And I think that's cool. I think that's a cool idea. And the fact that life on Earth has been sort of seeded here in the interim as a way for them to reconstitute themselves later. So the entire purpose of humanity is that we are literally empty vessels to be used as, you know, propagation fuel for when these aliens rebirth themselves. I think that's a really cool,
truly
cosmic
horrifying.
And I like the way it incorporates an actual concept like relical DNA, junk DNA. Most of our DNA in our genetic code is inactive because it's just waste DNA from hundreds of millions of years of evolution. But, you know, what if that actually did have a purpose? What if that was actually the genetic code for, you know, our alien progenitors? And when that code is activated, it just turns our body into meat that, you know, gestates another alien. I think that's cool. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, like our bodies are the bad guys as well. We're carrying it with us. It's icky. It's really icky feeling. And I really like it because something that you just mentioned then, the Lovecraftian feel of it. I like stories like this that imply that there's an ancient thing at play here. It's something that dates back before our time and even before the time before that. And it brings a sense of weight to the series as well, having it play back that far.
Yeah, I think if you're doing a science fiction horror and you don't open, you know, 45,000 years or millions of years ago in the past, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do like that opening as well, because I know that X-Files has a few out there openings as well, and it certainly made us, like, they made their name on it. I will say, just as an aside, I love how cruel the X-Files openings can be as well. That's also something that's I'm particularly a fan of. But I like that this one, that the film, it opens with a bang. The opening, like, with a statement of, this isn't just your normal X-Files episode. We're going straight back to, like, the dawn of man times.
I didn't necessarily realize this until last night when I rewatched the film, but my next film that I'm working on now also features Neanderthals. And they're not the opening, because the opening takes place 4 million years in the past, but it's the same time frame, 35,000 years ago, when I get to them. But I love that opening, even though there were never any Neanderthals in Texas.
Of course not. But I'm willing to forgive it that.
Yeah.
I think the title cards in the film really made me laugh, because almost every single one said, "We're in Texas. Now we're back to Texas." And it's like, it's just like, it's one of those things that felt like, I think the studio put these in to make really dumb people understand what was going on, because some of them are just like, we know where we are.
Well, if an ancient evil horror does come from anywhere, it would not surprise me if it comes from Texas.
I imagine we have some horrible cosmic, like, Stephen King type horror living under that entire state.
Yeah, it's a place of evil for sure. Sorry to anyone from Texas who may be listening.
Oh, they understand. But yeah, and again, it really does open with a bang, this film. For me, the strongest points of this film, I love everything in between where we do get into the conspiracy and what that is regarding. But I like the film when it's at its most cinematic as well, which seem to be in the first 20 minutes. I love everything to do with that bomb. That's a really strong way to open the film. And once more, it seems to be playing into the idea that for a short time, we're dealing with a story that is unconnected to any kind of alien mythology. We're just simply immediately in this little vignette dealing with the idea that there is a bomb in a building and we have to get out of here.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of both dates the X-Files and also makes it really interesting. Basically, the way the mythology of the show evolved was Chris Carter would, like, look at the news and say, what's scaring people now? How do I work that in there? So, like, in the 90s, there was the terror, the paranoia about killer bees, you know, the quote-unquote Africanized honeybees to make them extra scary, you know, because of Africa. And
of course.
So those get in there. There was the Oklahoma City bombing by the white supremacist Timothy McVeigh. There's a lot of stuff in this film and in the mythology of X-Files that is Chris Carter sort of riffing on right-wing conspiracy literature. So not only does the Oklahoma City bombing get in there, but Kurzweil's books are inspired by stuff like Behold a Pale Horse and other things, which were these UFO conspiracies novels written by, again, a white supremacist psychopath.
I would say, honestly, this is something that I actually picked up on watching a few of the episodes back very recently, was I never really picked up on how right-wing validating a lot of the stories are at play within the X-Files series. And one of the things straight away I noticed in this film was also, yes, it's the Oklahoma bombing. It reminded me once more of Arlington Road as well, which is another film that I actually think is a rather good thriller, but also seems to be validating the idea that, you know, there was a grander conspiracy at play, and it wasn't just this, it couldn't have possibly been just a right-wing extremist. There has to be some kind of grander conspiracy at play. And it did make me think that X-Files is a double-edged sword in that way, in terms of whom it seems to be playing into the hands of. And one of our good friends on Twitter actually mentioned this when I tweeted about the reboot series very recently, just earlier today, in fact. And they replied with, and yes, and we cannot forget that this is a series that made an Alex Jones character the good guy. And
yeah.
I think that, that's probably the should have stepped back from that. I think the X-Files TV show was a bit more subtle in regards to its approach to that, but with the reboot, it hits it kind of like head on, and it makes me feel a little bit greasy.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about the X-Files, is that odd tension between all these right-wing conspiracy narratives it's drawing from, and then the fact that all the writers are basically left-wing. Chris Carter is a Democrat. even though that doesn't necessarily mean left wing in America. But
Of course.
I think it's more just because trying to engage with this stuff and contextualize it in a way that is sensible is really, really difficult to do. You're basically trying to go through a minefield and not step on any landmines. You're probably going to step on one of them. That's what I tried to do with Gulf of Silence too. And the way I sort of dealt with that was I just sort of explicitly called it out for what it was,
Yes.
paranoid right-wing conspiracy stuff. But when you're contextualizing that in sort of a big, grand, overarching mythology, I don't necessarily think there's any real way to win it. I mean, like even John Carpenter with They Live, which I love that film. It's a great film.
Yeah, same.
It has a rabid anti-Semitic fan base who, despite
Yes.
John Carpenter going on Twitter to say that there's nothing anti-Semitic about it and saying so is slander and everything like that, they're like, no, you're wrong. Obviously, it's about the evil Jews that control the world.
Yeah. I mean, even to speak about The Matrix, we've seen it even more recently with the whole idea of red pill being red pilled. It's something that came from The Matrix itself, which is a film made by two trans women who actually made a film about the trans experience and about essentially something that they were experiencing at that time. And now it's been co-opted to be this right-wing signifier, essentially. They refer to themselves as being red-pilled and often present this meme as being like, do you pick the red pill or the blue pill? And even when they're confronted with that now, when the directors actually come forward and they say, this film was specifically about being trans, it's essentially their own fan base shouting back at them, no, it isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
That's quite shocking to me.
I haven't seen this yet, but there's a documentary by Errol Morris about Steve Bannon, who, the evil, the ghoulish, ghoulish Trump advisor.
The Toad Man.
Yeah, and he has this Steve Bannon, despite being one of those, hard right conservatives who hates Hollywood and everything, really wants to be part of Hollywood and really loves movies and things. And he apparently does this thing where he shows Steve Bannon like all these left-wing movies to get Steve Bannon's take on them. And Steve Bannon, it's like, he watches them and he just comes up with these completely disingenuous framings of them in a right-wing context that he believes wholeheartedly. So there's just no winning. There's no winning with this stuff.
No. You understand the mindset behind why Breitbart or Breitbart, whatever it's pronounced, don't care if I'm saying it wrong. But you start to understand where that fan base and culture came from, because it's not about whether or not it's the right interpretation. It's just as long as it confirms to this particular way of thinking, then they're going to be happy with that. But yeah, sorry, I brought us down a tangent there. My apologies.
Oh no, you're gonna lose your right wing listener fan base now.
I think we lost that fan base quite some time ago, in fact.
Yeah.
But Andy, I did want to ask as well, just in regards to the X-Files. Just to reiterate, you're not a particular fan of this show. It's not something that you've watched, and you're only familiar with maybe one or two episodes.
Yeah.
So, what was your experience with this film? What did you struggle with, if anything, with regards to Fight the Future?
To be honest, I think that there are a couple of things. One was the way that they introduced Mulder and Scully, because I'm aware of who they are. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces here and there, and it did surprise me. I have watched this film before, but long time ago. But how it doesn't really build up their entrance at all, that was kind of strange, considering it was meant to be a film that was being made for non-fans to watch also, that they just, especially Scully's intro, she just appears out of nowhere, and we've had about 10-15 minutes without them, and they just appear. So there's nothing in cinematic language that's speaking to the audience to say that these are the main characters now.
Yeah.
It very much takes for granted that the audience is going to know who these guys are. I mean, at the time, because the X-Files was so big, they obviously felt that they didn't need to do that. But it is a strange entrance for them in the film. And the only other thing is the introduction. What are they called? Those three characters? Is it the lone?
Oh, the lone gunman.
The lone gunman. That's it. That was the point of the film where I have no idea. This is for TV watches. I have no idea who these guys are at all.
That's honestly the point in which I thought you were going to mention first off as well, was the introduction of the lone gunman, because they don't really get any establishing for anybody that isn't familiar with the show. And I also think Walter Skinner as well is marginalized to such a point that in regards to the film, you really need to know who he is to understand anything about his character in this film. Most of the time, he's just giving looks across a boardroom.
Yeah.
And that's really the most that his character gets to do in this film, other than that scene with the lone gunman as well. But yeah, that's the point I thought you were going to mention first.
Yeah. I think the other thing as well is I'm not sure as a standalone experience what you would get out of it at the cinema as such in terms of like the end idea, because I do feel like the ending is a little bit abrupt for what it is, like considering how much time they spend building up to it. I did write in my notes the whole contaminating of the base evacuation thing at the end is very abrupt, and I really don't know what's going on and why the ship flies off, and it just leaves me with a lot of questions more than anything else.
Well, it's because he introduced the vaccine into the
system.
system.
Well, I kind of got that, but it felt very like there was a disconnect between the smoking man and his goons and what Mulder was doing down in the depths. Like there's no kind of crossover at all. I mean, obviously there's reason for that because obviously they've got to continue the show and stuff, but I don't know whether, as a standalone film, the ending was completely satisfying. It almost felt like, in a way, at some point, this was part one of a movie trilogy. And then at some point down the line,
like that for me,
when they got the commission for season 6, and all of a sudden these movies weren't going to happen anymore, that they had to... there seems to be a couple of things here and there that are kind of obvious reshoot things where they've kind of go, oh, right, we've got to land back into the series now. So, yeah, I think it kind of harms it a little bit because you're kind of, in a way, left wondering what the point of it was, like, in terms of, like, it being a movie.
That's one thing that... I mean, I want to reiterate, I love this film. I really, really enjoy it, and I think it gets a lot right about what I love about the X-Files. And I think that it works as a legitimate film. But obviously, I'm always bringing to it the baggage of having seen, the series surrounding it. But one thing that does irk me, and one criticism that I do have for the film, is that the character arcs are really about these characters in relation to the X-Files and in relation to the continuing investigation of the extraterrestrial. And where the film essentially leaves us is the characters in the same place that they've always been. Which is with the X-Files opening and them continuing the search. And I think that's simply because they were moving into another TV series. I think the status quo needed to be disrupted by the end, and that would have justified everything. I think that's the only thing that it's lacking. I feel like the characters have all got arcs. And the actors really sell the film. The story's good. The mythology's great. But at the end of the film, they needed to be in different places than the series has left them for me. Obviously, that was never meant to be. I think if it had been continued to be a film series, that's when we would have really taken the next step in the evolution of the X-Files.
Yeah, I share that criticism.
Yeah, I think you'd have to go back and see if there are any draft scripts lying around, whether the ending got changed, because that whole bit at the end when they're in Washington feels, again, like a reshoot where this is like a way of getting them reset into TV show mode, because it in a way, and also because of its positioning now in the series canon, it just kind of feels like a sideshow runaround. And now we're back to the main series, even though it was intended to be this grand opening up of the story into this kind of big finale, like the opening to a grand finale that never really happened. And it's kind of funny now that like this whole sort of mythology thing hasn't really been wrapped up in the way they originally intended, I don't think.
No, not even remotely.
Because it's been stretched out beyond its natural life. So it's kind of a shame, because it does, like, throughout the whole body of it, it's like, oh, this is going to be great. It's leading up to this thing. And no, it's kind of, we're back to normal at the end, and it's kind of a little bit unsatisfying, I think, at the end of it. And I think as a general audience member, you'd be like, it was okay. And that seems, I mean, when you look at the reviews, that seems to be the kind of general audience consensus, that it was fine, it was okay, which is a shame, because it had potential to lead on to something better, I think.
I think so. I share that in terms of it being a stepping stone to something else as well. I still think it works, but then again, I always am approaching it as an X-Files fan. But I do think it works as a film. But I do actually really like the last 20 minutes, because again, I was mentioning, I feel like the first 20 minutes are very cinematic, and I feel like the last 20 minutes are very cinematic as well, because it turns into almost a silent movie.
It goes the Alien and Predator route of becoming pure cinema. Just no dialogue.
And I love that element of it. It always felt like, oh, this is different than what the X-Files normally does. This is not TV. In TV, you've got to have somebody, like, there's got to be a room in an office where somebody explains the plot. This is all visually told here. And everything with the vaccine as well, infecting the system, it's all visually told. I know this cigarette smoking man does give a line or two for the people in the cheap seats that don't understand it. But I do like that it just goes just very cinematic all of a sudden. And I love the presentation of this spaceship as well, of this UFO. And the Neanderthals as well that are still in the like incubation pods with the alien creatures ready to burst out at any moment. I mean, there's some great work by ADI as well with this film. Particularly, I like the aliens, but I particularly love the fireman who's kept like underground in Texas.
Oh yeah, with his translucent skin and everything.
Yeah, that is such a great puppet. And I was watching the making of as well, and they did it in like layers of. It took quite a lot to actually make that in terms of the practices that they used, but it looks fantastic. And I'm not surprised that they moved away from showing it bursting out of the body entirely, because everybody would have screamed alien ripoff. But I like that when we actually see these people that have been these incubation pods for aliens, that their entire chest and stomach, abdomen cavity is just missing.
Yeah, one of the weird things is this film is a PG-13 film, but it doesn't feel like compromised or anything. It has a sense of intensity to it.
Holy shit! Really?
Yeah,
but it's a 15 over here, so that seems to be more what we would expect from X-Files. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, British more prude with gore, but not about sex. Anything sex is fine, but gore, no. Violence, no.
You guys had Antichrist passed uncut with an 18 there, so anything's possible.
That's what we do.
But you watch the episode that follows this, the season 6 opener, and it's way gorier.
Yes.
way gorier. The TV version is gorier than anything that's shown in this film, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I think the attack as well is more brutal in the TV series as well. When his
really
his colleague
violent.
comes along to meet him. Yeah, I was actually quite shocked when I watched it back with how jarringly gory it is compared to the movie.
One thing I do like about the movie too, in terms of these supporting characters that nobody coming in will recognize, though, is John Neville as the well-manicured man, who's always my favorite of the evil old white conspiracy guys.
Yeah.
Because he's just so suave and so British, and I think he's really good in this. And you know that he's going to die because he's getting so much to do. Yeah. And he dies.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that he was actually in the main series. I thought he was just here for the film, but he doesn't he appear like from season 3 onwards or something?
Yeah,
because he's kind of a well known. So in terms of like they're having unknown people in like for guest roles, that's kind of they must have been planning that for this, because he does have such a central role in this film that I genuinely thought that he was just cast for this film, and he wasn't in the actual series, because the way it sets him up, it kind of looks like, from a casual view, it looked like, oh, this is just a film character rather than somebody who'd been established already.
I've always liked him in the TV show. I think in the film they do present him as the most English person that ever lived as well. I like the establishing shots that England gets, because you've got to make an impact very quickly. We're in England.
It's really funny that, because when it cuts to it says Somerset, I was like, bullshit. That is not Somerset. Because that house gets used so much in films, and it's so obviously in LA. Because I think the original, I think they planned to do more overseas shooting and more locations, but I think the time constraints of the schedule that they had, when you look at the schedule of this film, it's pretty baffling, to be honest.
Well, hey, it's better than what they do in the series, in the early seasons of the series, where they're in Vancouver and it's like the jungles of South America.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's because we're just talking about a completely different era of TV shows. Like they would have had about a week to make an episode or something.
That said, though, I think the original seasons of the X-Files look way more cinematic and way more evocative and moody than anything on TV today.
I mean, watching them back now, I know that we've had the new transfers essentially for the X-Files TV show, the remastering of the X-Files TV show, where they've opened up the frame essentially. I know it's cropped in slightly, but honestly, watching them back now, outside of the 4:3 framing, which I never had a problem with anyway, they're still, as mentioned, I think it's also a part because they shot on film as well, which again changes the game entirely when it comes to these things. But I was watching it saying these still look fantastic.
There's something about, especially when again mentioning the darkly received revival seasons. When you compare, which were shot in Vancouver, there's like this schism in the fandom over the show's move from Vancouver to Los Angeles and how it changed the visual look of the show. And yes, the post-season 6 episodes do look a lot brighter and sleeker, but they still look good. They still look very classy. But there's something very sort of gritty and primal about those early Vancouver seasons. And then you watch the revival episodes, which were also shot in Vancouver. They look nothing like that. They look just like anything else. There's nothing cinematic about them. There's nothing interesting about the lighting. And I think it's not...
They feel cheaper, so much cheaper as well.
They feel like television. Whereas I think when the X-Files is at its best, it looks like a film. It looks like cinema. Yeah. Especially in the new 2K restored widescreen versions. It looks like cinema.
I 100% agree with you on that. I mean, I know that there are the episodes as well out there that don't look the best, but when we're talking about X-Files at its best, it's quite untouchable for me. I think it's still a touchstone, really, in TV. And I know that we've had certain TV shows flirt with the idea of being quite as arresting as this was, but I speak about Lost and things like that followed, but I don't think anything since the X-Files has captured audiences quite like the X-Files.
Oh, that's another thing I wanted to mention when we were talking earlier about, just how omnipresent it was. Something that the Zoomers, the new generation of people who are 10 years younger than us, don't understand is, they think, like Marvel's really popular or whatever. Compared to how just sort of culturally omnipresent something like the X-Files, or another example, Titanic. There is never there's never going to be anything like Titanic again. They cannot comprehend how omnipresent it was, how much it dominated pop culture, how much money it made. Like it's of course been dethroned by Avatar, by Avengers 16 or whatever since. But nobody talks about those really anymore.
Everybody talks about Titanic for years that followed that film, and there were documentaries. The Titanic itself became this huge phenomenon once more, and I think that when did Avengers Endgame come out? Because it feels like it was either 2 years ago or 20 years ago, because nobody talks about it anymore.
No, it's just product. It's just it's all just product. Whereas Titanic was like a certified auteurists blockbuster, which again they don't make anymore except for Jim Cameron. Even though I think making sequels to Avatar is a waste.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I like Avatar, fine, it's fine. It doesn't need 16 sequels. Come on now.
I think that's the thing I'm most interested about those sequels, in terms of I really want to know how they're going to do, not critically, but just financially, whether they're actually going to be of that level, because we've always been proven wrong with him, or whether they're just going to be underperforming, as the studios would put. Because no one talks about the Avatar films, and it's just odd as well. I think the weirdest thing is that Avatar land, the Animal Kingdom.
Oh, yeah,
because it's
Disney.
it's a bit like flogging a dead horse, because it's like they built this really elaborate land for a film that no one really cares about that much. That, you know, they're getting it again with the Star Wars thing. There's talk of the Star Wars land being completely retooled to be more sort of overall Star Wars rather than just be based on the sequel trilogy, which they really, I don't know why it seems really stupid in retrospect for them to base a whole land around a film series that hadn't even been completed, or, you know, its legacy hadn't been cemented at that point.
No, because it was always one film away from failure.
Yeah.
As well, it's always, and when it does, that whole land, the bottom falls out of
it's
it.
kind of strange, yeah. And like with films like Titanic, yeah, we're still talking about it now, and it still pops up in, you know, you always get the odd sitcom that mentions something out of Titanic. I was watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine last night, and there was a Titanic reference in it. So, you know, those things will live for as long as people are still watching that film, and they pass that along. Whereas with these new ones, they don't do that. And even though I hadn't seen much of the X-Files, it's still a kind of a big part of my life because it was everywhere. And also, I was going to mention this before, that that Simpsons episode that they did. Can't remember what season. That in a way, when someone says X-Files, I'm not sure whether it was the same cover in the States, but there was a Simpsons video cover. Is it called like The Dark Side of the Simpsons or something? And it had...
Oh, yeah.
It was everywhere, and I think every kid had a copy of that Simpsons compilation. It must have been about 4 or 5 episodes on it, but it had that Mulder and Scully, the Simpsons version at the front, and that's what I always remember. And
it even gets the Mulder the sex pest thing right as well with his badge.
Yeah,
and he's splayed out on his picture ID. I think that's a great episode. That could be just introduced to the X-Files canon.
Yeah, no, it would sit right alongside Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
It does feel like it could fit as a part of that.
Yeah, so even though I haven't seen very much of it, it still feels like it's part of like my life growing up, because it was everywhere. It really was.
Yeah.
And you just don't get that now. I think everything's more
homogenized,
marketable,
and it's a little bit more fringe in a way, because you got like the mainstream's got smaller in a way. I think people are more interested in other things. So even though things like Marvel are big, they aren't as big as what things used to be. I sound really old now.
I feel similarly about Avatar in terms of, speaking about James Cameron as well. I've mentioned it on the podcast before. I don't want to ever be in a position where I write off James Cameron. Everybody wrote off James Cameron before Avatar was released, and then it went on to be one of the biggest films of all time. Much like you, MK, I wish that he wasn't kind of like spending all of his time making Avatar, like umpteen Avatar sequels. I want to see James Cameron get back to being James Cameron.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested to see how this Avatar sequel does land, and if there is an audience there for it. I think that there probably is, because people still turn up for James Cameron. I'm sure that they will. But yeah, I'm just wondering how much pull it will have compared to that 2009 film.
I'm sure it'll break box office records again and everything. I'm sure it'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
It'll be good. But I liked Alita Battle Angel.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Me too.
I think it would have been a lot better. I think it would have been incredible, even maybe, if Jimbo had directed it himself.
100%.
Because I mean, I like Robert Rodriguez. He did good on it. But there's a huge gap in, just directorial power between Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron.
And it does feel like Robert Rodriguez is doing a James Cameron film, and there's only one person really that can do a James Cameron film, and that's James Cameron.
And it's ably demonstrated by the last Terminator movie, where James Cameron again wrote the script. And again, I liked it. It's the first bearable Terminator movie since T2. I thought there was a lot of good ideas. Thought Linda Hamilton was really good, but the direction is what sunk it.
Yeah.
Kneecapped its potential. Like, if James Cameron had been at the helm, he could have taken that and really made something propulsive and exciting. And then they got the Deadpool guy, and the action sequences aren't very coherent. Or
We should have had you on for the Terminator episode. We've recorded that. That's already in the
but it'll be
bag.
coming out after this one now because we've moved. I was so down on that film that we decided it wasn't a very good season opener.
Really?
I think it was more, down to the directing more than anything else because I thought it was so flat looking.
Yeah.
And also, I just didn't feel like it really added much to it just felt like they just moved some of the pieces around, but it was still very much the same.
Yeah.
Again, it suffered from trying to recreate Terminator 2 again when it really should be doing something else. I think we came to the conclusion that the only way forward with that series is to do something in a different genre, make it more horror.
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't be doing anything with it at all.
Well, yeah, no, I think that was the other conclusion.
It needs to be done.
They should just stop.
Same thing as X-Files.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've got to kill the things we love, you know? It's one day somebody's got to take Old Yeller around the back of the shed. But yeah, one of the things we said about that was just simply, I was very much of the opinion, much like yourself, where I liked Terminator Dark Fate, but I didn't love it, and I was glad to finally see a like you say, a Terminator film that was, I would say, enjoyable, because it had largely been not for so long since Terminator 2. But when it failed, I wasn't arsed, and I was like, yeah, this is, how did they not see this coming? Even though it's an okay film, it was always destined to fail because it's just okay.
Yeah. And the budget is way too high. Like,
ridiculously so.
yeah, like where is that money on the screen?
No, I mean, after as well, when Terminator Genesis came out, and that had like a $200 million budget, and that also, I don't know where that went, and that failed so I mean, I know it made money in China, questionably, but that failed in the US quite fantastically. Why did they go and pump the same amount of money, or even more, into it once more? I don't understand that reasoning.
It's really interesting when you compare again with these 90s blockbusters, these 90s mid-budget blockbusters like the X-Files Fight the Future, which looks, I think it's a really good-looking film. Fight the Future is a very good-looking film.
Is.
And the budget for that is, I think, what, $65 million?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which today,
$66 million.
Yeah, which today would be like, what, I don't know, like 120 million maybe at most. That's still a reasonable price. You know, it looks great. And then you look at something like Alien 3, which only cost 50. Well, not factoring in the all the stuff that came before, but that cost like $50 million. And again, they have such a palpable on-screen presence in the way they look, and then all these like $200 million, CGI laden blockbusters we have now, they just look kind of cheap.
Yes. Yeah, they feel digital, they feel weightless, and they feel cheap to me.
Yeah. It's because they invest too much in the post-production.
Yeah.
And they don't do, all those films you just mentioned mostly are in-camera jobs with giant sets, or they shot in the real world, or, they're not green screen dominated films.
Yeah, like the in Terminator Dark Fate, the big centerpiece set piece where they're in the plane, in the cargo hold of the plane. Yeah. You can tell on the screenplay when Cameron was writing that, he's like, oh, this will look amazing, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that does not translate well when it's all just done on a green screen.
No.
Like, if Cameron had done it, he probably would have, like, flown them up in an actual plane.
Yes, exactly. It would have been in the Vomit Comet.
Exactly.
The whole thing would have been filmed. I was going to say, it's not a good place when really you've got Tom Cruise starring the Mummy outdoing an action sequence. I mean, that also looks really bad, the whole plane sequence in that film, but they actually at least went up there and dropped a plane.
And then the rest of the CGI budget went to touching up his sagging chest for his shirtlessness.
I imagine it was at that point they thought, should we be doing this actually? Should we have even made this film? If we have to touch up the main actor's sagging chest?
Well, back to Scientology, I guess going like OT clear doesn't give you quite the reality-defying powers that they say it do.
To be honest, I do think that he looks strange in that film when he's naked anyway. He still looks, even though they've touched up his chest, he kind of looks like his skin's a lot looser and everything's like hanging a little bit wrongly. Like almost there's too many potatoes in a sack.
Yeah, he's going to be getting surgery soon, and it'll be probably very bad.
It'll be like Roger Moore at the end of the Bond series when all of a sudden his eyes are pinned back.
Oh man.
Or maybe like Sylvester Stallone. I don't know what that face is supposed to be anymore.
Yeah, he's. I watched the new Rambo recently, and I think he's mostly puppetry now.
He's the whisperer in darkness.
Yeah. Okay, so actually, it's a good point for us to. We've mentioned the budget. It's a good point for us to actually go over the stats and facts for X-Files: Fight the Future. So at this point of the show, we normally just go over what happened when the film came out, such as the budget of the film and the box office for the film, the films that it opened up against and where it opened, and then we go through some critic stuff. So just to begin with the box office, the budget was $66 million, and in its first weekend, it opened to $30 million. That's the US box office. And just to give you an idea of films that it opened up against, in number 1 we had The X-Files, which I would expect to be number 1. Number 2 was Disney's Mulan. Number 3 was The Truman Show. Number 4 was 6 Days, 7 Nights. And number 5 we have A Perfect Murder. And number 6 was Can't Hardly Wait. Number 7 was Hope Floats. Number 8 was Godzilla, which there's almost like a connection between Roland Emmerich Independence Day with the X-Files as well, that we do get a shot of Mulder pissing up against a poster of Independence Day. And at number 9, there's Deep Impact, and number 10 is The Horse Whisperer. So there's a few notable names in that list, like The Truman Show, and obviously, as mentioned, Godzilla, one of the biggest flops of the 90s.
I revisited that last year. I remember liking it a lot as a young child. It wasn't last year. It was the year before. Whenever the 4K version of it came out, I was like, oh, this will be an interesting time to revisit this film and see how it stacks up against other things from the era. It can't be as bad as people say it is, surely. What?
Honestly, I you're going to feel like I'm just copying you, but I had the exact same experience with it, but much earlier. I went to the cinema to go see it. I actually saw it at the cinema 3 times in a week.
Wow.
Because I loved Godzilla when it came out, but I hadn't really seen the original Godzillas, or the original one and the series that followed. And then I revisited it years and years later, and I have felt disappointment like it, but it was like watching a different film completely. Like suddenly everything fell through for me. And I don't know what it is, because it must have been the same film that I've seen. I don't know if I just must have walked into a different theatre every time, because yeah, it completely changed for me, that film. That's one we're definitely going to do on the show at some point.
Yeah. It might be good to do a comparison piece as well between that and the redo, the
Gareth Edwards one.
Yeah, that's it. And because the thing is, it's like I'm debating in my mind which one's the more entertaining, because you've got that one which is ridiculously bland, and then you've got the Roland Emmerich one which is awful, but is kind of almost like magic because none of the components make any sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of almost slightly, it's like magic, bad movie, big blockbuster thing, and it's kind of bad but quite fun to watch. Whereas the other Godzilla's kind of just really boring, mostly, apart from the monster action.
I think they're both just really boring.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because I haven't seen that other Godzilla since the cinema, so it'd be interesting to compare those two again.
Oh, the 4K definitely does not do the visual effects any favors.
I mean, even when I saw it on HD, but there were a few shots where I remember there's a particular shot of Godzilla's eye opening in a sewer, and I remember like almost jumping back in my seat. It was so bad. But yes, anyway, that's Godzilla. And going back to the X-Files and the critical reception for the film, Rotten Tomatoes has a score of 66% and a 6.2 out of 10 average rating, which I think is drastically too low for this film. And the consensus is that results may vary for newcomers, but fans of the series will enjoy its big screen transition. And for our critic review, I've gone to Neil Jeffries at Empire, and he says, "The X-Files can stand proud as a genuine movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end." Wow, that's high praise indeed. Sorry. A beginning, a middle, and an end, 2 charismatic leads, and a franchise ahead of it. An impressive cinematic makeover that belies its TV roots. X-Files fans add 1 star to the following and trust no one who tells you any different. And he gave it 3 out of 5, but I guess if you're an X-Files fan, it's a 4 out of 5.
That would be my rating.
Yeah, I letterboxed it recently and I gave it 4 out of 5. I think that's a very solid rating for this film. I really like it. And the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 72%, with a 3.7 out of 5 average rating, and the IMDb score is 7.1 out of 10. So yeah, it seems the critic consensus, with it being about 66%, is a bit lower than how it's been judged over the years and people gone back to it. I think especially considering how the series has gone off the rails as well. Not that people didn't look at it more fondly at the time anyway, but I think looking at quite where the series went, people look at this as being like a high point now.
I still go back to that thing. I do think it's a film that's been slightly compromised by the fact that it was meant to open up into a series of films and it's had to go back into a TV format straight after. So I do feel like there is something in there, which I think if you are watching it as a standalone movie, there's something about it that's not quite satisfying because it has to dovetail back into that TV format. And yeah, you do get that scene at the end where the characters have remained the same, and it's like, and we were talking the other week, I think, about films that if it's not even a great film but the ending's great, people will be a bit more favourable to it. But if the last 5 minutes are a little bit underwhelming, then you may be a little bit more critical of it, because I feel like there is something in there. It builds towards something and then it has to really kind of double back on itself to try and not change too much, because it's got to go back to the series.
Yeah, it starts walking on eggshells in its final moments.
Yeah, this is the only instance I can think of a cinematic movie based on something where it's had to go, where it's canon, and it's had to go back into a regular series. Because usually they round these things off and then they're kind of movies or that's it or something. Whereas this has to go back into, many more seasons. And it has been definitely compromised by that, because I don't think it was something they were intending at all. Probably even when they were starting, like when they're shooting it, because obviously it was filmed way before season 5. And I still think all the stuff with the studio wanting another season happened at that point, and they were left with this film which had to be, in a way, just another episode but on the big screen. And if you read some of the reviews, some people do say that it didn't quite translate to the big screen. It did feel like an extended 2-hour episode, and that's always something that TV shows going on the big screen they always have to contend with. That is it a bona fide film or is it just a double part episode? And I think some of the Star Trek movies, especially some of the Next Generation ones, have suffered from that.
Yeah, the Next Generation ones definitely.
Yeah, it's a real fine line to tread, and I think it almost works here. There's still a lot I really like about it, but I think it's just in that having to backtrack right at the end. I think that it kind of suffers, because you just get the feeling where like no one really went through much change. And it's a kind of a shame, really, because and it's annoying that when you learn how the series progressed, because it's like it seemed like it was going to go into some really like grand stuff, and it would be really cool, and it kind of it doesn't seem like anything happened that way, and it seems like it just got more and more convoluted as time went on.
Yeah,
they probably planned another 2 films, to finish off the whole story, and they've had to like just take bits and pieces from that and stick it in the other seasons and then invent more stuff, because like even to the fact that they had to like invent 2 new leads to replace the old ones in the later series. It just feels like commerce got in the way, I think.
And then there's the revival series, and everything gets retconned into nothingness, and that's all Chris Carter himself.
Yeah.
Do you feel, though, with the revival series, do you feel that you can easily just disconnect it from the rest of it? Because I do. In my mind, it exists on its own separate plane to the rest of the X-Files.
Does not fit at all, and it's so terribly done in terms of how it tries to re-engage with the original storyline. It's just a disastrous attempt that you can just easily separate. It's not something like where, back when Prometheus was released, there was great anguish because it fit just well enough that now you had to deal with this. Like, it just makes no sense. It does not align at all. Like, the aliens are good now? What? Huh?
Yeah, they undo it all so very, very quickly. I struggled with it. It's weird as well because I always considered myself to be a mythology type fan. I love some of the Monster of the Week episodes, but I love the mythology stuff, and that's what I followed. I think that's also why you can tell I struggled with the series past the mythology culmination in like mid-season 6, and by season 8 I was falling out of love with the show. And yeah, when it comes to the revival, though, the mythology episodes are the worst.
Yeah, they're so terrible.
Like, not just the worst in terms of, they're bad. Like you mentioned, they're terrible. But also, they are the worst, I think, that the series has to offer.
Yeah, you haven't seen season 9, apparently. But
no, I haven't. I have not seen anything of season 9.
You know, season 9 is infamous as a low point. The worst season 9 episode is better than those revival.
Oh, well, that says everything.
You can see that when you look at the series overview on Wikipedia. That when you get the little graph of the Rotten Tomatoes scores of episode to episode. So when you see season 10 and 11, whenever it gets to an episode titled "My Struggle," it goes down to like 30% or something.
Yeah,
and it goes straight back up again for another like standalone episode. So yeah, it's strange how even seeing the show that those mythology episodes are derided, like real properly derided.
Their decision to make it a little 6-episode season that also replicates the original structure of having mythology episodes and then standalone episodes was disastrous. An obviously poor choice that should never be made. If you're going to do the X-Files now and you only have 6 episodes, you have to make 6 myth arc episodes. You have to be able to properly build that story.
Yeah.
You don't cram an entire season's worth of stuff into 60 minutes. It's just terrible and untenable.
It is. And I guess the big question to ask, though, is would we recommend X-Files Fight the Future? I will say most certainly I would. I still think it's a high point for the series, to be honest, for me personally.
Unreservedly recommend. Even setting aside, its connections, I think it's very well made on all technical fronts. It's really well acted. Mark Snow's score is great. It's his first
that's
huge
what I wanted to mention.
score.
Mark Snow.
It's so weird that he was contracted to write the score for his first big Hollywood score in a long time. Since then, is for that New Mutants movie or whatever that came out.
Yes.
It's like he deserves better.
He totally deserves better, but I watched that film very recently, and the score's, really nice.
Yeah.
I really quite like the music to the film. I left that film thinking, what a pile of shit. I can't wait to listen to the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's a Mark Snow score. They just let him do his thing. And his score for the second X-Files movie is also excellent. But the score for this one, I think, despite some obvious points where you can sort of hear the temp track bleeding through, like you can tell this was temp scored with aliens in places, and
yes,
but it's great. It's really big and it's got strong themes and it's really well orchestrated. It's really propulsive in that way that you just can't write music anymore for movies. Like now it's all just flat, drab, bland wallpaper.
Yeah, dressing.
Yeah, just so much about this film, even setting aside its TV roots, is indicative of a filmmaking that you're just not allowed to really do anymore.
Yeah. It says a lot about the TV hierarchy, like in terms of the division between TV and film. It would be quite unusual at that time to have somebody who composed the music for the TV show to be allowed to actually write the music for the film, because something like that usually would be, we'll give that to like Jerry Goldsmith or somebody like that. That kind of move would be thinking about it now, it's like, that was really unusual. Whereas obviously these days, because that line's blurred between TV and film, like there's no real distinction and people cross over from one to another. But yeah, that would have been quite a big deal really for him to have actually been able to be allowed to do the music for this film, even though he invented all the the theme tune, which is iconic and everything. It's just a completely different world.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing as sort of like Angelo Badalamenti with Twin Peaks. Like Twin Peaks and that music is inseparable. The X-Files without Mark Snow would not be the same thing. So much of the show, when you go back and watch it, They're like, in the weaker episodes, they like completely rely on his score.
Yeah.
Like a good reason, like a lot of the X-Files remains like gripping and frightening is because of the music he wrote for it. This TV show has a great score.
It does, and I like the TV show as well in terms of the score that he presents. I know that it's like it's all electronic based, but with this as well, I feel like he takes that step up from the TV show to that, like as you say, that propulsive full orchestra feeling. I mean, I'm not technical when it comes to music, but I can feel the difference. Like suddenly he has that backing. And again, I feel like this for him, his music in the series is, as you say, iconic. It took on a life of its own as well outside of the series, as mentioned. It became a very popular dance track over here. And yeah, I feel like this though is like it's him taking the step into Hollywood. And it's unfortunate that he never really got to take more of that world, like with that full backing. I'm kind of sorry that we don't really get to see more of Mark Snow outside of the X-Files.
Yeah, well, that was also a result of the show going back to TV. Is that not only was he signed on to the X-Files to write music for every episode, he was signed on to Millennium, Chris Carter's other show.
Yeah.
So he was just working nonstop on the X-Files, and then when that was over, you know, he was stuck in the TV ghetto, basically. So he's still very well respected. It's been nominated for like a billion Emmys and things.
Rightfully so, definitely. And I guess one more thing that I do want to add as well, we've all, like I say, we definitely recommend watching the X-Files. But I also want to mention as well, we spoke about it at length on the episode today. This is going to be like a joint episode. I'm most certainly going to fully recommend as well The Gulf of Silence. I know that you can see it on Amazon at the moment. Is it available on like iTunes and most on-demand services?
Eventually. Right now it's just on Amazon Prime in the US and UK, and then for worldwide audiences it's available on Vimeo on demand.
Oh, right. And I certainly recommend finding that wherever you are. Like I say, I watched it on the screener link that you did send me, and I was really taken aback by it. But actually, when you uploaded it to Amazon Prime, it came up as the next recommended film that I watch after I'd seen The Arrival.
Oh,
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that it said, if you liked The Arrival, please watch The Gulf of Silence.
yeah, well, you don't, there aren't any weird backward bending leg aliens in my movie, unfortunately. But
You sent me a clip for that the other day and it made me laugh.
It's fantastic, yeah. I sent him that clip from the end when Charlie Sheen is having his like heart-to-heart with the neighborhood kid, and then suddenly his legs bend backwards and he runs off into the sunset. It just makes me laugh every single time.
It's just the Charlie Sheenness of it as well.
oh, yeah, that too. But that's one of those sci-fi movies that nobody really loved except Roger Ebert. He really went to bat for that.
Yeah. We've covered some films that are real duds on this show, and I'd say 9 times out of 10 there's normally a 4 out of 4 Roger Ebert review.
Does that mean you've done knowing?
It's on the list though.
Yeah.
That's a 4 out of 4. I love Ebert. The man had sometimes interesting taste in science fiction. He liked Fight the Future. He gave Fight the Future 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4, yeah, that's it, yeah. But he hated horror. Hated John Carpenter.
Yeah. Well, he liked the original Halloween.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Nothing else though.
It was a thing about violence, wasn't it? It was all to do with gore. For some reason, Ebert and Siskel they drew the line when it came to depictions of gore in movies.
Yeah, I like watching the old Siskel and Ebert reviews of like Friday the 13th sequels, and you just see Roger Ebert just seething, getting really worked up and angry.
Yeah.
Disgusting trash. He hated The Hitcher, absolutely hated The Hitcher, which I think is like the best slasher movie ever made.
I love The Hitcher.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. I think that's the only sort of slasher movie. I mean, one of the few horror movies in general. I think where I think it's really frightening. I think Rutger Hauer in that film is frightening.
Yes, he is. Again, I know I've used this phrase before, but it's the kind of like existential dread that comes with that film, and he's just this like he's a threat to your entire being and your place in the universe. I'm gutted that we still haven't seen like a Blu-ray release of that film.
There is one from Germany. I have it. It's probably going to be the only one that gets released. I saw it in 2019. Yeah, when Rutger Hauer died, the Egyptian here did a screening of it, and apparently HBO has lost all the prints. They had to fly in a print from a private collector in New Jersey.
Oh my God.
So that's why there's no Blu-ray releases. The Blu-ray release from Germany comes from a German release print. So it has German titles. It looks okay. They've had to do a lot of processing. There are points where you can kind of, if you're really eagle-eyed, you can detect that there were some frames missing. And so they just put a still shot there so it kind of jerks a bit. But that's probably the best there's going to be. Good job, HBO.
I'll have to hunt that down, actually, then, if that's the best that we're getting. Because I've been holding out for the longest time thinking, there's a Blu-ray release around the corner. I know it's coming. I can feel it.
Nope. Like, Arrow released a book about The Hitcher.
Yes.
But they haven't released, and that's because I'm pretty sure the elements are just not there anymore.
There was the incredible amount of disappointment when they were, like, teasing pictures of The Hitcher as part of their promotional campaign. I remember everybody was just like, it's happening. We're finally, because people in the same way that they were about the Dawn of the Dead Blu-ray because of the rights issue with that film in terms of the rights being held up and the obscene amount of money that was required in order to release them. It was similar to that. It was similar to like the fervor around it. And then it was a book that they released. I just remember this heavy weight of disappointment we all felt. But yeah, still waiting. I'm sure they will at some point get something together.
Well, in the meantime, the German release it's pretty serviceable.
I'll hunt it down, definitely. Okay, so that's all we have time for on this episode of Popcorn Digest. I do very much thank you for listening, and I thank you for joining us as well today, M.K Rhodes. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much. I had a lot of fun.
And for our next episode, we'll be asking, do you bleed? Well, you will, as we're going to be reviewing Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice. But until then, I've been Gareth.
And I've been Andy.
Thank you for listening.